Good afternoon and welcome to MPR News Presents. I'm Mike Mulcahy. Today I'm joined in the studio by the four candidates seeking the Republican nomination for governor. The primary is coming up in less than 2 weeks on August 12th, so here's your chance to hear what they think they can do for Minnesota, why each thinks he is the best candidate. In alphabetical order, the candidates are Scott Honor. He's a former business executive from Orono. Jeff Johnson, Hennepin County Commissioner who has the Republican endorsement. Marty Seifert, former state representative, House Minority Leader from Marshall, and Kurt Zellers, a state representative from Maple Grove and former House Speaker. The winner of the primary, of course, will take on DFL Governor Mark Dayton in November. Gentlemen, thanks all for being here. I really appreciate your coming in.
Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Mike.
Now let me start with a broad question. The state unemployment rate is at 4.5%, well under the national rate. Employers in the state have added almost 54,000 jobs in the past year. How do you make the case to voters that you can do better and that it's a good time for a change in top state leadership? And Scott Honor, we'll start with you.
Well, that's exactly the right way to ask the question, Mike, which is, can we do better? And the answer is yes. And, Karen Housley, my running mate, and I are out talking to Minnesotans about how we need to get our government back to the idea of pursuing excellence and striving to have an environment where everyone in this state has the best opportunity for a job, for higher wages, and to keep more of what they earn. And one of the stats that the governor's Department of Employment and Economic Development has put out is that half of the Minnesota workforce is underemployed. And we want to create an environment where there's more jobs available. And when I was up in Grand Rapids and met with Magnetation, a company up there that's remining the iron ore tailings, and they told me that they had an opportunity to build a new business, an iron ore pellet plant, and the state of Minnesota said it would take 3 years to get permits, and they went to Indiana and got permits in 9 months, and now there's 100 jobs in Indiana that could have been here in Minnesota. That's just one example of how our state is doing things that are causing us to not create the best opportunity for jobs in the state.
Jeff Johnson.
As I've been traveling the state the last year, most Minnesotans don't care about the unemployment rate because obviously they're going to get hammered into their heads that our unemployment rate is lower than the national average, which it is, but they're not feeling that. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about their kids finding a job and getting out of the basement. They're worried about their own jobs and working, as Scott himself mentioned, in a job that doesn't pay what their education would demand. And to expound on that 50% of underemployment, the shocking numbers are there's over 200,000 Minnesotans with a 4-year degree who are working in a job that doesn't require a 4-year degree, and another 60,000 on top of that with a 4-year degree working in a job that doesn't require a high school degree. That is very relevant to people, and I think what we need to do as Republicans is not just talk about the numbers, but talk about the fact that people aren't succeeding the way they want to. They might have a job, but they're not reaching the potential that they want to reach, and their kids aren't going to reach the potential that they want to reach unless we improve the business climate to create good jobs, not just jobs.
Marty Seifert.
Well, Mike, I've been the one guy who's traveled all 87 counties, and I can tell you right now that the average person doesn't care about statistics as much as they care about what's going on in their own life. We have families, middle-class working families that I talk to every day that are paying more for their health insurance. Their co-pays and their deductibles are skyrocketing. Their pay raises are anemic at best. They're paying more for energy because of Mark Dayton. They're paying more for their health care because of Mark Dayton. The roads are falling apart. They don't feel that their schools are doing as well as they could. So we can talk about the unemployment rate, which I would believe, if it's good, and I agree with my fellow candidates here, that the underemployment numbers are not good in the state. We can do better, and I think the average person, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or Independent, believes that we can do better than Mark Dayton. And the unemployment numbers are what they are, but they're not because of Mark Dayton, they're despite Mark Dayton, and we could be doing a much better job, I think, of growing the economy, but better lifting all boats. And it's not just about lifting yachts, it's about lifting all boats across the economy to make sure Minnesota is a better place to raise a family.
Kurt Zellers.
Well, I think it's about the career, not just the job. You talk with most Minnesotans about what they are most fearful of in our economy. It's not the unemployment rate, it's the underemployment rate of 53%, as everybody else has said. That's reported by Governor Dayton's deed commissioner. None of us Republicans here. That's the state agency. People are worried that their next expansion of their company isn't going to be in Minnesota. You look at the 3M plant, all the expansion is down in Austin, Texas. You look at the new Cargill flour mill, that's over in Denver, Colorado. People in Minnesota are worried about their career leaving the state, and then you have to pull their kids out of school. A friend of mine has a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Not only would they have to leave their hockey program, they have to leave their dance group, they'd have to leave their church that they really like and the church choir that the daughter is in, but then whether the other is employed in a different company, they're losing that. So we're not only losing one job, one career, but we're losing two. And I think that's the number one issue that Minnesotans talk about and are most concerned about. It's not that the unemployment rate is down or there's a few jobs being added. Is my career going to get moved to a different state because of the high taxes, high regulation, and poor business climate here in Minnesota?
Okay, so how would you do it? How would you improve things? And let's go around again, but let's start with Jeff Johnson this time.
Sure, there's no magic bullet. There are actually several things that have to happen, but it starts with the tax code. We have to have a tax code that is competitive with other states, particularly other states in the upper Midwest. And the philosophy that any economist will tell you, conservative or liberal, is low, broad, and simple. What we have is high, narrow, and complex in Minnesota. So that's number one. Number two are regulations. And we talk about eliminating unnecessary regulations every couple of years. This year they just had their quote-unquote unsession, where they eliminated a few things but nothing of great substance. We need to go in there and start eliminating regulations that are actually being enforced but are unnecessary or impeding growth. And then I believe the third piece is tort reform. I do believe that we're out of step with several other states when it comes to lawsuit reform. We have to be a state that is welcoming of entrepreneurs because we are losing a generation of them right now to states that surround us.
And Marty Seifert.
Well, I would agree the top issue as I travel the state is suffocating regulations. We have a variety of government agencies that are not friendly. We have more complex regulations. They take longer. I was up in Koochiching County and by International Falls, a construction company guy said in another state it would take 60 days to get his permit. In Minnesota, it's over 2 years for his project to get permitted. And he still won't know if the permit will actually be granted after spending tens of thousands of dollars. So we need to cut through the bureaucracy, and there's other states with Democrat governors that are doing it a lot more simply. So we've got to get our arms around that, and this isn't a partisan issue. We need to get our arms around regulations, permits, fees. My goal is to get us out of the top 10 in all tax categories, and it's not by making people pay sales tax on food and clothing. It's by streamlining and downsizing and right-sizing government. We have other people talking about broadening the sales tax. I am absolutely opposed to that. It's not based on ability to pay. To make an elderly person who's living in a trailer house, living on Social Security, to pay taxes on their food and their clothing, I think is not a direction we should go. But rather we reform and downsize government and do it in a smart, effective Minnesota-type way that reflects 21st century realities.
All right, Kurt Zellers, what's your prescription here?
There are 3 points, and it's not going to be much different. We're all Republicans, so we're not going to go off on a tangent and say that there's some wild issue. It's taxes, regulation, but I would also focus on education. The reason 3M doesn't get the bulk of their engineers from Minnesota, and in a lot of cases not even from America anymore, is because we do not have a focus on STEM. So it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. My focus as governor would be to bring that back to the forefront so that Minnesota is looked to as one of the best and the brightest in the country, let alone the world, for engineering students. You start that at this grade school level. You don't introduce mathematics, geometry, and physics to 11th graders and say this is going to be a great career for you. You start at the grade school level. Taxation, I agree with that wild, crazy conservative Rudy Perpich, that Minnesota should never be in the top 10 in any tax category. Starts with that. And then the last thing is a regulation. We started this when I was Speaker. We had a bill that was introduced that brought the permitting process down to 90 days. If after 90 days, a permit that's already been issued multiple times can't be reissued in 90 days, if the bureaucrats can't get to it, then it automatically is issued, and the permitter can go on about their business, their day, whatever they're getting the permit for.
Scott Honor.
Well, I think it is about regulatory reform, tax reform. It's also about making our state a right-to-work state so we can encourage companies to come here. But I think a place
right
where
to work means nobody is forced to
no
join
one's
a union.
forced to join a union, right? People will continue to have the option and the right to join a union, but not forced to do so. And this is an area where the broad topic, though, I think is a place where I'm different from my opponents, because it's not just enough to have these ideas. We have to get the agenda passed. We have to sell it to the electorate. And to reduce taxes, which should be a big part of the agenda here, we have to reduce spending. And I'm the only candidate that's calling for reducing spending in this state. And we do need to understand that even once we've done all this, we still have to go convince companies to move here. And Karin Housley and I are going to be the ones out marketing this state in an effective way to get companies to come back to Minnesota after we've passed an agenda that has regulatory reform, lower taxes, and making us a right-to-work state.
Jeff Johnson.
Well, I just want to respond to that, Scott, because you're not the only one who's calling for reducing spending. I think, frankly, all of us are probably calling for reducing spending. I have been since day one. I don't think it's good enough for us as Republicans any longer to say that let's just slow down the growth. Let's just do less than what the Democrats want. The difference is, and I have a basic philosophical difference with you here, is that you are calling for a 10% across the board cut.
In administrative expenses, yes.
Okay, well, I've seen that reported much more broadly than that, as a 10% across-the-board cut in state spending. I don't think that's either realistic or wise. I think that some things government does well and some things government doesn't do well. Some things government should do, some things government shouldn't do at all. And so to say that they're all the same and we're going to treat them similarly, I don't think we should be cutting roads and bridges at all.
Well, let's have Scott Honor respond, and then we'll get the other two candidates.
Yeah, well, we do have to reprioritize spending, but I believe we can lower cost. We can reduce spending in the state and get better results. We need to spend more on roads and bridges. I agree, but Jeff, you came out and said you didn't think that you could get after this budget in the first 2 years; that you'd have to get it in the second 2 years, and we don't have that time. One of the things I learned in business is when you see something going the wrong way, change it quickly, and we need to get the scale of this government reined in. We need to reduce spending. We need to have government go back to a more limited role and do the things it needs to do well.
Quick response, Jeff.
Yeah, that's not at all what I said. What I said was the real change you're going to see is in the second biennium. Every budget that I propose and pass will be smaller than the last, but you're going to see the real change in the second biennium, and anyone who understands government understands that's how it's going to work.
Let's have,
I'm ready to be governor on day one, and we're going to downsize, right-size, and economize government in a Minnesota sort of way on day one. We're not going to wait 2 years to figure it out because your administration is half over and half squandered. So we're going to get it immediately. We have the most detailed plan, consolidate 3 government agencies, 7% reduction in administrative costs, but that's not really where most of the cost is. It's an entitlement program. So I had a study conducted when I was minority leader of the State House asking the question, how many people move here from other places who are not Minnesotans and take advantage of our welfare programs? And it wasn't a few hundred or a few thousand, it was tens of thousands of people who come to Minnesota. And when other states confront challenges like that, they put in waiting periods and work requirements, which we should have anyway, whether you're a Minnesotan or not, whether you are a refugee or whether you're someone who's if you're able-bodied and able-minded, there's no free lunch. And I think we're losing track of, it's not about government growing 1% or shrinking by 3%. It's about what is the role of government in its constitutional limitations to make sure that it's downsized, right-sized, and economized. And the one key thing, Mike, in all of this is increasingly people are becoming a servant of the government rather than government being a servant of the people. You see that with them telling farmers how to farm, teachers how to teach, business people how to run their business, parents how to raise their kids. And so I may have a libertarian streak in me, but the reality is government is so big in Minnesota, you can't buy a cold beer on a Sunday during a Twins game. You can't light a firecracker off on the 4th of July, and that's just nonsense. Let's get in and start downsizing some of the powers and scopes of government.
That's Marty Seifert. He's one of 4 Republicans here in the studio today on MPR News Presents, running for governor in the primary next month, August 12th. Kurt Zellers is here as well. Kurt, let's get you involved here.
Sure. Well, thanks. And first of all, statement of fact, there will be a Democrat-controlled Senate. So whatever you're going to get passed, whatever you're going to accomplish, whether they be specifics or platitudes, is going to have to get past Tom Bach and a Democrat-controlled Senate.
For at least 2 years.
For at least 2 years. So that's, if whatever you're saying here today sounds great in the studio, on paper, but what is he going to sign? In my time as Speaker, we passed a budget that cut the size of government by 6%, reduced the cost of government by 8%, turned a $6 billion deficit into a $3 billion surplus, and I didn't raise taxes on a single Minnesotan.
I disagree.
Marty, I didn't interrupt you.
Government's
Just.
not
Marty, hang on just
8%
one second.
smaller than it was before.
Well, let's let Kurt finish, then you can.
And part of the problem is that this is, one of the things that we're focused on in my campaign is Governor Dayton, not a fight amongst each other. So the cost of government was an 8% 8% cheaper. The size of government was 6% smaller, but the budget deficit was $6.2 billion when we came in. It was a $3.3 billion surplus at the end of the 2013 budget, which ended on July 1st. That's what we've been able to show. A lot of the other things that are going to be said here today are but what I would do and what I could do and what I can do. That's what I've been able to show the voters.
Marty Seifert, make your point.
Mike, if you take a Minnesota management and budget analysis of the state budget, it's not 6 or 8% less than what it was from 2013 than what it was in 2011. I would have vetoed the budget that Kurt Zellers passed in 2011. It did not downsize government enough. It did not reform government enough. It borrowed from tobacco bonds. It borrowed from the schools. I would have vetoed the budget and returned it to the legislature. I would have vetoed the stadium bill that also passed.
But you signed
so if you want some disagreements,
you signed you actually
I would have
voted
done it.
for an education shift when you were there, Marty. So did Jeff. It's not as if it's a purity contest here. You voted for
I
education.
certainly wouldn't have signed that budget, Kurt, and that's one fundamental disagreement we have.
I didn't
think
sign
that
the budget
it
either.
It borrowed way too much money, and we as Republicans, if we want to spend money, we ought to pay for it and not borrow it. That's the problem the guys in Washington have right now. They say they're Republicans, they go borrow the money. They did it on the state level too. It's wrong.
And actually,
Okay,
Mike,
let's
just one quick,
quick.
because we didn't. That was Mark Dayton's the budget that he wanted. The budget that we passed that he vetoed did none of the things that Marty is saying.
All right, let's just remember we're on the radio, so let's not talk over each other. And Scott Honor wants to get in here.
Well, I just think there is one broader point here, which is Republicans, we need to accept the challenge of how to convince the electorate at large that our ideas are the ones that are going to make the state better. And I'll put forth a budget and a plan that has a real reduction in spending. It's going to be bold, and then we have to sell it to everyone. And I recognize that's not going to be easy, but it's the challenge we should take, because I think as Republicans we haven't done as good a job as we should have of marketing how our ideas and our conservative principles will make people's lives better. And what we do with the budget is a key part of what we need to do around that, and I'm up for that challenge.
Well, let's talk specifically then. Where would you cut the budget? If you want to cut taxes, if you want to spend less, what specifically would you cut, and how would we see it in everyday life? And Scott, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, I'd start by eliminating MNsure. We just spent $400 million of our state taxpayer dollars to bail out Obamacare, which is MNsure in this state. I'm the only one who's called for eliminating MNsure. I'd reduce the number of state employees. I'd get rid of the Minnesota Investment Fund, where the state is taking our taxpayer dollars and picking winners and losers amongst businesses. I'd tighten Medicaid eligibility requirements. I'd move people from welfare to work. We have a whole long list of other things we do. We put out a press release yesterday with our government spending plan, and we're telling people what we're going to do.
Go ahead.
Well, I can give you a laundry list of smaller things.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
That's all right. I don't think that it's necessary that we have our own state OSHA. I certainly would cut back on the spending that we've had with light rail and commuter rail and high-speed rail and now streetcars. I think we give some grants for economic development that are unnecessary. There's a snowbait program we can consolidate. But all of that is small potatoes until you start talking about the human services budget. I mean, that is where we are totally out of whack with similar states. And we can sit here all we want and say, this is what I'm going to cut, but we're not going to cut it unless we can get the DFL Senate to agree with us. And we won't get the DFL Senate to agree unless we can get the people on our side. So my goal has always been on day one to initiate a top-to-bottom audit of the programs that taxpayers fund in this state, starting with the human service programs. This is my job on the county board. And the ones that can prove that they're actually changing people's lives in ways that we say we want them to, moving them off of welfare to self-sufficiency, for example, they'll make the cut. But the ones that can't prove that we're funding because they make us feel good, and there are a lot of them, those are the programs that we need to cut. But we have an argument now to the people of Minnesota and to the DFL senators that we don't just want to cut. We want to cut because these programs aren't changing people's lives. That's the only way we get our arms around this overspending.
Marty Seifert specifically.
I think entitlement programs are the biggest part of the budget. That's the growth that I think all of us need to understand that it's eating up the budget. So waiting periods and work requirements and fundamental changes in those formulas, which are too detailed to talk about now, but focusing on work. It's not just about saying, hey, let's reform welfare. I'm talking about corporate welfare. I would include the stadium bill in the corporate welfare handouts that have been done. There are a variety of other programs that we have that I think, whether we agree or disagree, we can't just keep talking about, This person needs to be off of a program. There are entities that need to be off of programs as well. I have called for taking of our 26 cabinet departments and consolidating 6 down into 3 that have alignments that, like Health and Human Services, being aligned together, cutting down the number of permits and inspections that relate to that. The rail program, Southwest Light Rail, I don't believe is necessary. I think that needs to be put into roads and bridges. And then we have a variety of things in the bonding bill that need to be line item vetoed as well. And I think a lot of those things, when you put them together, we will have a smaller, more effective government. It's really about reform and perform when it comes to our state budget.
Kurt Zeller.
Sure, Mike. And again, you're looking at it from a global standpoint. The bulk of the budget is health and human services and education. And looking at health and human services, the medical assistance is one area where CMS has actually been looking at Minnesota, put us on a watch list. I think the governor released some numbers a week or two ago that they said they saw $10 million in savings. That needs to be an audit. It needs to be done by the Office of Legislative Auditor, separate from the governor, separate from the legislature, in conjunction with an outside firm, an unbiased. The governor's now using all kinds of consultants to audit, whether it's MNsure, whether it's our programs. I think that needs to be done. There are numerous waste, fraud, and abuse cases in there. Is that going to save you $1 billion on day one? Absolutely not. But the second way you do that is you start the downsizing of government as the baby boomers retire. You introduce technology where there used to be a hand-to-paper business where someone has to come into a government agency, stand across a counter from another person, and have a piece of paper handed to them and back. You introduce, as those jobs are retired, you eliminate the position behind it, and then you introduce technology. We actually had a program that was in place that Texas has used very effectively. We had it in place that one of the first things that the Democrats went out and repealed as soon as they took over was called the Sunset Commission. Looked at every board, commission. So no one who has been there, Republican or Democrat, that had a kind of an attachment to that program. It's something we worked on. Marty called for it. I think Jeff even called for it when we were there. But the Sunset Commission, when they'd sunset all these different programs and commissions and make them come back and say what we were tasked with as a mission or what we were supposed to accomplish, either we did or we didn't get it done. If you didn't get it done, then repeal it and we take the money back.
We are hearing from the 4 candidates for governor today. On the Republican side, they're going to be facing off on August 12th in the party primary. Scott Honor, Jeff Johnson, Marty Seifert, Kurt Zellers. This is MPR News Presents. We're going to break quickly for the news, and we'll be back in just a minute.
I'm Stephen John from Minnesota Public Radio News, Gaza Health.
And welcome back to MPR News Presents. I'm Mike Mulcahy, sitting in today with the 4 Republican candidates for governor who are facing off in the August 12th primary. Kurt Zellers, Marty Seifert, Jeff Johnson, Scott Honor. They're all here in the studio. And I want to start with you, Kurt Zellers,
Sure.
With this question. What's the one thing that distinguishes you from these other candidates?
Very simple. The one guy that faced off, Mark Dayton, and when he pointed at me and said, you will raise taxes to balance this budget, the people are with me, I said we can do it without a tax increase on a single Minnesotan. Turned a $6 billion deficit into a $3 billion surplus.
Marty Seifert.
Well, I'm the one guy born, raised, educated, lived my whole life in Minnesota. I spent 18 years on the farm, 4 years teaching, 9 years in higher ed, 14 years in the legislature, 12 years as a small business owner, 3 years at a hospital, and 3 years as a real estate agent. So I think I bring by far more real-life experience to the governor's office than any other candidate. And I also think I have the ability to win. I've never lost an election in the state of Minnesota in a general election.
Jeff Johnson.
I think I'm the guy who can actually beat Mark Dayton in November. And I say that because I think we need 2 things to win as Republicans against a relatively popular incumbent. One is we need a united and energized Republican base. We cannot win without that. I received the party endorsement, and that's what the party endorsement's all about. I am the only one who will come out of a primary with a united and energized party. And then on top of that, we need somebody who has a history of getting independent votes in large enough numbers to matter, which I've been able to do in Hennepin County.
Scott Honor.
Well, I'm the only one who spent my life in the business world, and I'm running against 3 men that have spent over half a century as political insiders. And I know how to get the team built to get the job done, and we'll have the bold agenda that we need to see passed in this state.
Let's talk about a subject that Kurt Zellers touched on, which is the major portion of the state general fund spending, and that is K-12 education. I know you've all talked about the achievement gap, the differences in achievement between students of color and other students, white students, majority students. Marty Seifert, how would you address that? How do you solve that achievement gap and still not spend a lot more money on education?
Sure. Well, I'm the one guy in the governor's race of either party who's been a Minnesota licensed public school teacher, so I know a little bit about education on the front lines. Number one, and some of this may sound a little politically incorrect, but for kids to achieve, especially those who are immigrant children, they need to know how to read, write, and speak English at an early age, and we need to be fully immersing our students for success. You are not going to learn science or social studies or the other important things if you don't know how to read, write, and speak English. And the teachers I talk to, doesn't matter about their ideology, all agree with me on that. So that's number one. Number two is we need to make sure we enforce our truancy laws, which we're not doing in many cases. There's some real basic things on discipline, on making sure we have a good academic school day, which we don't have. And I don't think we should be doing additional testing. Our kids are getting over-tested. Certainly we need to measure, but it's getting to the point where there's less time for academic instruction. Rather than actually getting the instruction done, we're going the other route. And while I support school choice, the simplistic answer of saying we're just going to give everybody a voucher and we're going to march 8,000 to 10,000 immigrant kids into Holy Angels and into Breck and so forth is not realistic. And I'm just going to be very frank and brutally frank about that while I support school choice, let's be honest about how to really get our arms around this in a practical way, because 91% of the people in the state of Minnesota send their kids to a public school. While we have good charter schools, we have good private schools, parochial schools, etc., we got to be able to be practical about getting our arms around this. It's not just about money. There's a lot of policy things we've got to do.
Jeff Johnson.
Well, Mike, I haven't just been talking about the achievement gap. This has been one of my 3 priorities since day one of the campaign, and I don't think we will be able to narrow the achievement gap unless we have a governor who makes it a top priority of his, and it will be for me. I'll take it head on. And there are several things that need to be done, but bottom line, I think you have to have a rather public debate, maybe at times battle, with some in the education establishment and some in the leadership of the teachers union about parental empowerment and about real school choice. It's not about the money. I think we've proven over and over again that throwing money at this problem doesn't solve it. It's not making it any better. It's about giving parents more control. And it's not just about saying we'll allow you to send your kids somewhere else, although I do think that's a part of it. I think that market economy will make a difference. But it's also about, for those parents who want to keep their kids in their neighborhood school, which is most parents, then give them more control over what's happening in their own schools. And there are a lot of ways of doing that. Unfortunately, every state in the country has figured out how to do it better than us. Let's start taking some of those ideas and trying them here until something works.
Scott Honor.
You know, my wife Jamie and I support KIPP, which is a charter school in North Minneapolis. It operates at a 25% lower cost per student, pays teachers 16% more, and the students do twice as well on tests. Well, to me, we ought to be doing more things like that, and we have a governor who's actively working against chartered schools in this state, and we need more school choice. We need to have dollars follow the student. And we need to make sure that our local school districts have the ability to hire and retain the best teachers to teach our kids. And that means getting waste out of administrative expense and pay teachers more. But pay them based on performance, which means eliminating teacher tenure and eliminating this last in, first out rule that we have where it's illegal in Minnesota for a school to terminate any teacher other than the last one hired. That makes no sense. We got to bring common sense back into the equation of how to improve education.
Kurt Zeller.
Sure, Mike. And a number of these, my ideas, we actually passed through the House when I was Speaker, through the Senate, while Amy Koch was Majority Leader, and sent to the Governor. He vetoed. So I think it'd be a real clear division. Number one, I think you have parent trigger. So 51% of the parents in a school decide that this Minneapolis or St. Paul or Maple Grove school is failing their students. The parents then are in control. The focus, though, starts with the focus on the kids, not the adults. So not the superintendents, the teachers, the principals, but what's best for the kids. Ending LIFO and actually having an assertive and a defined not only principal but teacher evaluation program so that the bad teachers, ask the superintendents and principals, the number one thing that frustrates them, it's trying to get a bad teacher out of their school or out of a classroom. I think also ending besides the LIFO, but ending some of the current programs that feel good, that we're going to keep sending more money in for whether it be a literacy or whether it be a transportation program that doesn't show real results, you should means test that. Are we getting better results? Are we getting more efficient transportation by giving more money for the busing, or is it just that we're making kids ride the bus for half an hour? They aren't really getting a better education. And lastly, I would go back again to focusing on STEM schools, introducing that technology, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics in the beginning of the schools, not at the end when kids are ready to graduate and already pick their college.
Would you, as Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, try to take away the right of public employees to collectively bargain? And let's start with you, Jeff.
Well, I think in a perfect world that is where we should be, because I think I agree with FDR on this, who said that there is this inherent conflict of interest when you have public employees who are also being paid and bargaining. However, that's not going to happen anytime soon in Minnesota. And I think when I listen to what Scott Walker says about how he handled that 4 years ago, he says, maybe we got to where I wanted to go, but we didn't do it the right way. We needed to have a conversation with the people of Wisconsin so that we didn't entirely blow up the state to get there. And so, his style and mine probably differ a lot. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be started. I do believe we need to move there eventually.
Scott Honor.
Well, Jeff, I think you've got a defeatist attitude here, and that's the problem with people who've spent too much time in St. Paul. Because we need to take this on. We need to recognize that the teachers union, Education Minnesota in this state, is working actively against the interests of students and parents in Minnesota. When Governor Dayton exercised a line item veto for to give $1.5 million to Teach for America, so young recent college grads can come into inner city schools and make a difference, and he does that because the teachers union asks them to, and he does their bidding. That's ridiculous, and we've got to take this on. We have to recognize that as Republicans, we have to get the word out to the citizens of the state that this teachers union is working against the interests of our state, and I'll show bold leadership in that.
Kurt Zellers.
Sure, I think one of the first things we should do that actually has broad bipartisan support, meaning that Democrats and Republican voters will agree, is the paycheck protection. If you want to be in a union, if you want to have a union, then collect your own dues. Do your own work. Don't force the school district, who is there to educate kids, to do the collecting for the union's coffers before all the dues. And my wife Kim's a public school teacher in the union who pays her dues. Believe me, I'd love to see him go and try to get the dues out of Kim Zellers every week or every 2 weeks instead of just having it automatically deducted for her paycheck. And one of the things that has been probably more successful in Wisconsin than even the collective bargaining was just getting that, because unfortunately the unions are just too lazy in some cases to go after the members. But then the member has the conversation with the union and says, quite honestly, for $1,000, what am I getting out of you? What are you doing to help me as a union member? But absolutely, I think we should be a right-to-work state. Again, I'm curious as to how we get that through the state Senate as a Democrat control.
Marty Seifert.
The question you pose, am I going to take the right of public employees away to bargain? And the answer is no. I mean, I've been a public employee. I'm not going to eliminate the ability of people to belong to a union, but on the flip side of that, they should be able to choose whether to belong to a union. If they choose not to, they should have the ability to do that. And a lot of that is dealing with the reality. But the people that I worked side by side when I was a public employee for a few years were hardworking, good people, shared our values, wanted Minnesota to be a good place. I'm not into demonizing them. The reality of all of this is that it's very hard to have good morale for the people who work for the governor when you come in and beat them up with a lead pipe every day. So what I would say in a very practical way is people should have the ability to choose whether they want to belong to a union or not. But to take away the right to collectively bargain, whether it's public or private, I'm not going to be in favor of that.
Jeff Johnson.
Yeah, just to respond to Scott, I think there's a big difference between having a defeatist attitude and just being honest with people about what's possible. And I think people get tired of politicians who make promises that they can't keep, that I think everybody knows they can't keep. And so I'm going to be honest with people, whether you like it or not, or whether they like it or not. That's what you're going to hear from me.
Well, I believe we have to take on the goal of trying to convince everyone that our ideas are the best ideas, that they're going to make the state better. And I'll tell you, in business, I had success in places where people thought you won, where if you just said, what's the most likely outcome, you wouldn't have gotten the thing done. And we actually did accomplish what we set out to do because we had the view that we could accomplish it. And we need leaders that have that optimistic outlook and that vision and are willing to take on the challenge of how do we make sure that people understand what we're doing and why that will make our state better for everyone. And I'll tell you one thing for sure, it's not going to happen if we don't try. And I'm going to set a bold agenda and make sure that we're out there marketing what we're doing and why it's going to make this state better for everyone.
I think there's
Marty
a better
Seifert.
chance of me having hair than a Democrat Senate passing a right-to-work law, but I'm just call me old-fashioned for being a realist.
Well, some of us are challenged in various ways.
Note
It is
that
a
none of
radio
us
debate.
pointed out that you're follically challenged, Mike.
Okay,
We
It
don't
is
want
a
to get
radio
anywhere.
debate, but I'm
Excellent.
not looking too good over here.
Okay, let's talk about transportation, because there is a report that says over the next 20 years the state is facing a $12 billion gap in what needs to be done in the area of transportation. And Scott Honor, I'll stay with you and ask you, how are you going to fix that? If you want to cut spending and if you want to get a hold on taxes, how do you keep the roads and bridges and the way for people to get around where it should be?
Yeah, well, we have to put more money into roads and bridges, and we got to fill that gap. And a basic function of government is to provide the infrastructure for our state, and we're not even meeting our current needs, let alone building for the future. So I'll reprioritize spending, and we can do this. We can spend fewer dollars in total, put more into roads and bridges, and get better results out of government. And that's the attitude we should take, that we can do all that. And we'll shut down that light rail project from Minneapolis to Eden Prairie, because the $1.7 billion that's being spent there could be better used in other ways to create the infrastructure we need for this whole state. But I'll make sure that we're thinking not only about how to meet our current needs, but meet our long-term needs, so that as we're out there pitching to other companies why they should come to Minnesota, we're showing them that we're being thoughtful about how we're developing our infrastructure.
Kurt Zellers?
Sure, I think first of all, it should have a 3-point plan. It should reduce congestion, it should move people and products, and it should be cost effective. If you look at any of the train projects that are currently going, and if, even with in Jeff's debilitated condition, I think he could walk from St. Paul to Minneapolis faster than that damn train's going to get over there. At 53 minutes to go from one downtown to the next at a mere 11 miles an hour, 12 miles an hour, is that cost effective? No. I was a convert. I was not always a fan of the transit, but then I worked downtown for a Fortune 500 company. I took the bus out of Maple Grove, Bus Rapid Transit. You get on in Maple Grove, you zip right downtown, it drops you downtown, you walk a few blocks to work, get a little exercise. That works. And shocking to some of the folks in the bureaucracy, you can actually drive a car on the same road that you drive a bus. They work equally. You can't drive a train down 694 and not have a big problem in a cut-up road. And to this idea that we're billions and multiple billions of underfunded, my little guy Will, my 8-year-old, he's got a several thousand unfunded list of hockey equipment that he would like. There's lots of stuff he would like. He needs skates, a stick, and some elbow pads. So the idea that we can't prioritize, and if you go through the STIP, which is the State Transportation Improvement List, and look and try to find the top 5 projects in the state, you can't. It's divided up into 8 different districts. Even in their districts, then they have another group. The problem is we haven't prioritized, and before you ask for one more dime from the hardworking taxpayers, the last time the gas tax was passed, there was an agreement made from MnDOT. We will go in and we will find all kinds of efficiencies, effectiveness. We will go comb through every single agency how we do this, and we will come up with cost savings. As we sit here today, not one letter has been produced from that state. So before they come to the taxpayers for more money, they should do their own homework.
Marty Seifert,
I'll be a little more specific on this. First of all, you prioritize lanes over trains. Everybody agrees, regardless of their political philosophy, that the traffic congestion in the 7-county Twin Cities metro area is ridiculous and unbearable, and that's going to be a high priority for me in the governorship. How do we pay for it? Because we're not going to go down the road of just hoping it works out. So I have proposed 1/3 of each bonding bill be dedicated to roads and bridges. Just to give an example from last cycle, that'd be $400 million in the even year, almost $100 million in the odd year. That's a new infusion of dollars into traffic lanes and traffic congestion relief. We need to work with the feds to get our share out of the Highway Trust Fund, which Minnesota is underfunded right now. For the amount of money that we put in for the federal gas tax, we get less back. We need to streamline our permitting and design processes, which makes it 18% more expensive to build a road in Minnesota as compared to our neighboring states when it's the exact same topography, right-of-way cost, etc. as Kurt alluded to streamline the MnDOT process, because we have too many people on the administrative side and not enough on the worker bee side actually getting the job done.
And Jeff Johnson.
Mike, this is not rocket science, and it is priorities. And this is kind of my life on the Hennepin County Board, because every form of transportation other than roads have become a religion to some people. And all of the focus right now, at least at the county level, but I think it's happening at the state level too, is on everything but roads, whether it is light rail or commuter rail or bike trails or sidewalks or streetcars. And the problem is everybody in Minnesota relies upon roads. Even if you don't own a car, you need roads to have the ambulance come to your house or to have the truck bring the fruit to the grocery store that you go to. And so that's where the focus has to be. And so you move some of that money, I would argue most of that money that is going to all these other forms of transportation into roads, and you've just filled part of that gap, a large part of that gap. And I don't know if that number is correct, but I think we are behind on roads, and I think we ought to spend more on roads. I think there are also things we can do with respect to regulations that would help address things, whether they're environmental regulations or whether they're prevailing wage requirements, where we could make some changes and spend a lot more on roads without having to bring in any more money from anywhere else. But that will be a top priority for me.
That's Jeff Johnson, one of the 4 candidates for governor on the Republican side. They're running in the August 12th primary coming up in just a couple of weeks. And we're hearing from them today to get their points of view, see what you think. You're going to have to vote after all. I want to ask a couple questions about some issues that I think are important to Republicans, and we haven't been hearing too much about it. One is the same-sex marriage, which is now legal in Minnesota. I think I've read that you all believe that marriage should be between a man and woman, but you're all thinking that you wouldn't change that law, and I wonder why. And second, on the issue of abortion, what will you push for as governor? Will you restrict abortion in Minnesota? And Marty Seifert, let's start with you this time and go around this way.
You bet I would push to restrict abortion. Right now, the policy in the state of Minnesota under Mark Dayton and his running mate, who is a vice president for Planned Parenthood, Tina Smith, the policy is taxpayer financing of abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. I don't care what your philosophy is back home as you're listening to the radio, but any measure is extreme policy. So we have a variety of things from ending, the courts are going to strike down if you get too restrictive, but I would do what I could to protect life. I'm the one guy in the room with a 100% MCCL rating. I'm the only guy in the room that had a voting record. Scott doesn't have a voting record, but of those of us that do, I have a 100% voting record with the MCCL. I would restrict taxpayer funding of abortion. We would work on the fetal pain bill. There were 3 or 4 bills that Dayton vetoed his first 2 years that I would sign, so there's a direct contrast there. When it comes to the same-sex marriage bill, the reality is I would bet $500,000 that bill is never going to pass the legislature and get to my desk. Now, I don't have $500,000, but maybe Scott could help me out. He just gave his campaign some money. We have a reality we deal with in the state of Minnesota. It's not going to go anywhere.
All right, Kurt Zellers on these 2 social issues.
Sure, and with all due respect, Mike, the only people that bring these up as issues are editorial boards and reporters. You travel around the state of Minnesota, people are worried about how are you going to fix my road. I've had a pothole since the beginning of February or March in Maple Grove literally on Lawndale Boulevard. There's still potholes there. That's what I get asked about. What are you going to do to make sure that my job doesn't end up down in Texas like everybody else who works at 3M? I want to stay here in Minnesota. What are you going to do about my kid who's now just graduated from college, has $60,000, $70,000 in debt, and doesn't have a job? She sits at home. She's babysitting. That's what people are talking to me about. Look, we've all had the voting record. I don't think we should have taxpayer-funded abortions either. We all have voted, Scott being the exception, on these issues. I've defined it as one man and one woman, but the people of Minnesota have spoken. I'm moving beyond the issues, and I'm focused on the issues that the people are talking about, not in a lot of cases what editorial boards want to ask us about.
Scott Honor.
Well, I agree with Kurt on all that, and I supported the traditional definition of marriage. I'm pro-life, and I do believe that we should eliminate taxpayer-funded abortions through full term. We should eliminate taxpayer funding, period, but certainly shouldn't allow abortions through full term. And I would pass legislation that crossed my desk, that was that had that a pro-life agenda was supporting. But I do believe the focus has to be on how we make this state better for everyone, and those will be my priorities around jobs, education, shrinking the scale of government.
Jeff Johnson.
I am pro-life. I have a pro-life record, and I will always be pro-life, and I support traditional marriage, and that will not change either. And, one thing that I tell people is that I don't think we should act like we're ashamed of those positions or that we're running away from those positions, because in my heart, they are the right positions, and people need to know that. I tell people whom I know don't like that answer, I still tell them, here's where I'm at, because if that's important to you, you need to know that. However, those are not my priorities in running for governor. And I've set forth my priorities as the business climate in the state, the achievement gap, and actually making programs that taxpayers fund work. And so that's where my focus will be, but you need to know where my heart is. If those bills land on my desk, I will sign them.
We're starting to run just a little bit short of time, and I know that the issue of MNsure came up, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on it because we just don't have enough time, but let me ask sort of a broad question about that. Do you think that people should be required to have health insurance? And Jeff, let's start with you.
No, I don't believe that at all. I don't think that that is the proper role of government, to require people to buy anything.
Let me just follow up, though. Given that it's the federal law, is there anything the governor of Minnesota can do about that?
Well, I think what we can do, I don't get to decide as governor that now we're going to ignore the federal law. You asked me what I thought, and I don't think that is the proper role of government. However, what I have said I would do with respect to MNsure and Obamacare is, number one, apply for a waiver from Obamacare, and some people roll their eyes at that and say it's not going to happen, but the Obama administration has granted more waivers than we can keep track of. And we actually have a case to make as Minnesota that we had the best system in the country before. So that's number one. And then number two, you start removing the barriers to the private sector to actually compete with MNsure.
Let's just come back around this way. Scott Honor.
Well, I'm the only one who's calling for the elimination of MNsure, which is Obamacare in this state. And we've got to get back to the idea of having our state focus on how to improve wellness and lower the cost of health care for all Minnesotans. And that means, let's get this website turned back over to the federal exchange. Let's unwind the Medicaid expansion and not have, what we just saw, $400 million of our taxpayer dollars going to bail out Obamacare in Minnesota.
Kurt Zellers.
Sure, and actually, Scott, I fought it ever becoming a law. When I was Speaker of the House, Mark Dayton came to us and said, you will do this. You'll put a Minnesota model in place. And I fought against it, didn't allow it to happen. But again, early on said we should apply for a federal waiver. We should introduce open markets, so you should be able to buy your car insurance just like your health insurance, just like anything else across markets, and then go back to the system that we had, which was Minnesota Care and MSHA, which had already had the pre-existing condition problem taken care of. Those two programs were delivering high quality, low cost to a lot of Minnesotans. Sorry, Greg.
Marty Seifert.
I'm the one guy who's worked at a hospital the last 3 years, the Catholic hospital down in Marshall, Minnesota, and I've seen people have been unable to pay their bills. And forcing people to buy health insurance will solve the problem no more than solving homelessness by forcing people to buy a home. We need to start talking about health care, not about insurance companies and insurance policies, but health care. You go down the street here to the Dorothy Day Center, and they're not going to buy health insurance. So we need to figure out as a community through nonprofit and otherwise how to solve this issue. And I think health vouchers, which is something I've pushed in the past, would be a very good, clean, non-bureaucratic way of solving that issue.
All right, we're almost out of time, and I told you I'd give you each 30 seconds to give me sort of the elevator pitch on why folks should vote for you in the primary. And let's go reverse alphabetical. Start with Kurt Zellers.
Sure, and thanks a million for hosting us, Mike. We appreciate it. As a middle-class dad, married to a public school teacher who coaches his son's hockey team, in my daughter's father-daughter dance in the spring, I think I'm the middle-class family that is most like most Minnesotans. I've lost my job before, had to have that conversation with my wife. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, but through hard work, paid my way through college, actually became, I think, a success here in Minnesota. And I think Minnesotans want somebody that has that experience, balanced a $6 billion deficit into a surplus without a tax increase.
Marty Seifert.
I'm the one guy born, raised, educated, lived my whole life in Minnesota. I have the experience, 18 years on the farm, 4 years teaching, 9 years in higher ed, 14 years in the legislature, 12 years as a business owner, 3 years at a hospital. I think that I have the values that reflect the average person in the state of Minnesota. It doesn't matter your party, just vote for Marty. As August 12th comes up, I don't want you to forget, so don't be tardy, vote for Marty.
And Jeff Johnson.
I was endorsed by thousands of the most active and engaged Republicans in the state of Minnesota after months of vetting all of us as we all tried to get it, and they picked me, I believe, because they see me as the one who can unite and energize the Republican base and has a history of going out and getting enough independent votes to actually beat Mark Dayton.
Scott Honor.
Now, my running mate, Karen Housley, and I are going to partner with the citizens of Minnesota to take on these politicians, and we're going to pass an agenda that makes the state better for everyone. And we're the only ones that have a bold plan for reducing spending. We're the only ones that eliminate MNsure. We're the only ones calling on President Obama to not move this immigration crisis from the southern border to our state's border. And we're the only ones calling for term limits. And we'll have the resources to win.
Well, thanks to all the candidates for coming by today, and thanks everybody for listening. Remember, the primary coming up on August 12th. Be sure to support the candidate you believe in, and we'll be on the air primary night starting at 8 o'clock to report on the results, and of course have full coverage at mprnews.org as well.
Support for